Hey everybody, it's Erica Shepherd and this is Firestarter. And on today's episode, we have the wonderful Leanne Feliciano. Hello Leanne, thank you for joining us. And today we have a very juicy subject, which if you guys know me, juicy just comes with the territory. But today we have a very deep and honest, raw discussion about dealing with addiction holistically, which is not something that is talked about often in our culture. First of all, we don't talk about mental health enough. We don't talk about addiction enough, but then to talk about it, like healing from it and recovering, that's another story. And Leanne brings a huge perspective to the table because she's been through it. Now, I personally, as a former psych nurse, I see the other side of it from a conventional treatment perspective. I've treated a lot of people with addiction over the years with pharmaceuticals and sending them through 12-step and a lot of mainstream models. But Leanne brings a unique perspective of having done all of the conventional treatment for addiction and also a holistic perspective that you may not think about, and you may want to consider for you or your loved one if they're struggling with that. So first of all, Leanne, not only is she healthy and happy these days and on the other side of that whirlwind that comes with addiction, but she is also a owner of a business now. Hello.
Hello.
You go, girl. So just letting you know that Leanne is the owner of Sacred Wild Woman, which as an earth medicine practitioner, you go girl, and is also trained in the shamanic arts. She, through Sacred Wild Woman, Leanne unifies shamanism and hypnosis as they create a beautiful weaved web that merges ancient healing art practices with modern day hypnosis methods, where clients are given the space to heal and work through their limiting beliefs and behaviors that no longer serve their personal journey. Leanne creates a safe and sacred space that facilitates healing, discovering your inner truth, and finding your true calling here on planet Earth. So once again, thank you for joining me today, Leanne. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Wonderful. So I say, let's just kind of start from the beginning. I want people to understand who Leanne is and what she's been through. One of the things I love to do with fire starters is understand other people's perspectives and story. I'm a huge, huge, huge believer in the power of storytelling. Mm-hmm. And so I would just love for you to tell your story and where you came from, what you've been through, and where you are right now. And we'll just kind of take it from there.
That's a loaded question because there's just so much, right?
So much. I just want you to start where you think you should start.
So I'm gonna start on as an early childhood, because my early childhood has led me through this journey.
Yes.
So not only did I deal with trauma and sexual abuse, I also dealt with mental health issues. Yeah. So it was a hodgepodge of a gamut of things, right? Mm-hmm. So it started, even early on, I was, I played the victim for a very, very long time. You would behave this way and have mental illnesses and have addiction if you were molested, an only child, didn't have a father, mm-hmm. The gamut, like my father had been murdered, things that we tell the story. There's a story that we tell ourselves. Actually, it was the story. It was the story I bought into, meaning that I played the victim. So therefore, if I played that victim, I wouldn't have to get better. Mm-hmm. And that's a story many tell, right? Mm-hmm. Because then therefore, I can continue to behave in a certain way that will be the attention that I needed, which was negative attention, which was the attention that I thought was good attention, but because I didn't know any better. So,
right.
I was molested from the ages of 2 to 11. I was that kid that was made fun of as a kid. I was a latchkey kid. all these stories. My father had been murdered. My mom was a single mom. All these things that led me to depression.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt unworthy. I felt like I didn't belong to the earth. And I also had these spiritual gifts. I had these gifts that most people do have. But I was seeing things and hearing things at an early age that was just becoming overwhelming as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you deal with all of that. And then these gifts that I had to shut them off because it became too much. Well, that's what the addiction added on to that as well. So I had experienced my first suicidal ideation at the ages of 11. And that was my journey from 11 all the way to the ages of 30.
Wow.
So I tried to commit suicide from ages 11 to 32. And I was told that I had dealt with manic depression. And later on, I was told I was borderline personality disorder, that I'd have to take medication for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
But there's so much more to that. But
Yeah.
I had attempted to try to commit suicide off of a 5-story building in middle school.
Oh my
And that
gosh.
was my first experience.
Wow.
And that was when they started to learn about suicide attempts. And so that's why suicide is such a, the acknowledgement of it is such a big deal for me. Like it's very near and dear to my heart, very near. And from that point on, I started taking medication, and I still kept on having suicidal thoughts. I still hadn't dealt with the trauma. There was so much that was compounded in one little mind, 11-year-old mind.
Oh my gosh. So with that, I want to just stop you for a second because first of all, that's intense. Like, that even starting at that young age, you were already thinking about ending your life,
Mm-hmm.
which
Mm-hmm.
is intense. And I'm glad you didn't, but that's another, I would say, just, I don't know, testimony that people can start struggling young, and especially with addiction, it starts before typically adulthood. If I can interject with the perspective and tell me if this resonates with you, not only because of your own story, but you are friends with a lot of people who are in recovery.
Yes.
That there's a couple common threads I've noticed with people who deal with addiction, and one is trauma, a history of trauma, and also an unstable environment when it comes to guidance or a consistent inflow of love and support.
Absolutely.
Yes. And so for you, when you're describing the story of, first of all, your dad was not only did he die when you were young, he was murdered.
Yes.
Like, hello. And having to deal with that. And then, like you said, the single mom, she can only be around so much because she was working, I'm assuming.
Right.
So then
what you would call a latchkey kid.
A latchkey kid, exactly. And so you are now this young kid kind of raising herself without that nurturance and that guidance in that way to figure life out. And that had to have been really traumatic. And that's the thing when it comes to, there was the abuse side for you, and that's already traumatizing, but there's also that emotional neglect side. I don't think a lot of people understand emotional neglect. And when there's emotional neglect, like it's not that there wasn't abuse, it's the opposite of that. Nobody's there and nobody's reinforcing your story and who you are, and then you fill in the blanks yourself.
Right.
And so, like you said, you were questioning your worthiness, am I worthy in this? Because when you're not getting any validation, otherwise we kind of fill in the blanks. And if there's nobody there, we kind of think maybe I don't.
Right. And parents do the best that they can, right? Like with the tools that they're given. There's this, they're given what they have.
Yes.
Especially with the environment that she was placed in.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So, I don't blame her. There's lots of forgiveness that has happened over the years for that.
Right.
So, that was my first experience with what you would call a suicide attempt.
Mm-hmm.
And from there on, there were, I mean, I can count like being in state institutions, like I can remember thinking that I was going to live only to the age of 23. And, I had children, and they were my saving grace at that point. So like they saved my life pretty much. Otherwise, and that still kept on continuing, like the instability. But then that was when my addiction started hitting in. I didn't start doing drugs and alcohol. And actually, I started drinking when I was 13, 14 years old, actually, come to think of
Right.
it. And that was my first drink. But, I can remember the elusiveness, the feeling of like, oh, yeah, this is great. Like, I don't have to think. I don't have to feel. I felt so much. My mother said that I was cheap, like it was too needy. And
Right.
that because she had to do her own thing, and I was an only child at the time.
Right.
So, it kept on evolving over the years, and I still, like, I'd been in therapy, and I just didn't understand why I couldn't feel like I fit in. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't understand why I didn't want to be in my own skin.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until years later I realized that I didn't have the coping mechanisms to really be in my skin. I didn't have the nurturing that I needed to be. I didn't nurture myself. I didn't know how to nurture myself,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
Like, and it was, being in destructive relationships, being in codependent relationships,
Yeah.
being in gaslighting relationships, very addictive relationships. And, I had been into the holistic arts. Like, I started doing a lot of spiritual stuff. I got my first tarot cards at the age of 6. Like, there was something there that I was familiar with. I was
Mm-hmm.
always reaching out for this spiritual something.
So already at this young age, you're like, I know there's more
Mm-hmm.
to life. I know there's more. I don't know what it is. Or you're starting to play with it. And then, like you said, you're exploring this, but at the same time, you're just trying to keep your head above water.
Mm-hmm.
And you became a mother very young,
Yeah, age of 19.
age of 19, and also handling these, like you said, relationships that had a lot of patterning that takes a lot out of somebody. Whether it's
Absolutely.
codependent, gaslighting, manipulation, those kinds of patterns that just drain the heck out of you, and spiritually, and aside from emotionally and energetically. So for you, when did you start to try to get sober, and how was that journey to in that point, and when did it finally work for you? Because I know you and I have talked about this, but I would love for you to share with me.
Yeah. So I had a boyfriend who told me that I had a problem drinking, and I had just gotten divorced for the first time.
Yeah.
And he said, "You can't leave that drink there." And I said, "Why would I want to do that? That's a full glass of wine and it's $12." And I was like, and I thought to myself in that moment, I might have a problem. And I was in denial for a really long time, but he was definitely the gateway to me getting sober. But it was for him, not for me, right?
Right.
And the pivotal point was when I was feeling empty. I was feeling very empty. I was feeling like bankrupt, but
Yeah.
I was not sold yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got into, actually, let me back that up. That's not true. I got into my first rehab at the age of 26,
Got it.
and I was kicked out for fighting.
Well,
I don't advise that. I don't advise that at all. But that was my first go round.
Yeah.
I was a mess, right? Like, I had to relearn everything I know today. I had to relearn how to do everything,
Yeah.
and it was a journey. It's been a very big journey, and so I didn't stay sober at that time. It was a big journey for me, and then I got divorced, and then the guy that I started dating was saying, you can't even leave that glass of wine. And I was still in denial about my alcoholism, even though I'd gone to rehab. So
Right.
we play these tricks in our heads to say, yeah, I'm not an alcoholic. I just had some emotional issues, and
I'm
again,
in control. I'm in
I'm
control.
in control. Like I got this,
Right.
right?
Right.
And the truth of the matter is that I didn't have it at all. Like I was barely holding on to dear life.
Yeah.
And I remember getting my first white chip, and I won't talk about that other program, but I remember going in for the first time in sobriety, and I really wanted it, but it was not something I was capable of doing because I was not capable of being honest with myself.
Yeah.
And that was my first experience. I stayed sober for about 6 months. And then for 10 years straight, I kept on relapsing and relapsing and relapsing.
And what treatments had you been doing to because you were wanting it. You were
I
going
was
to places.
wanting it. I was wanting it. I wanted it so bad, but like there were so many elements to me getting there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't suggest it, however, and it's because it's a very painful road. However, I was diagnosed with a borderline personality disorder, and so we couldn't figure out if it was the alcohol or the drugs or the mental illness. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I went through talk therapy, dialectical behavior treatment. I went to cognitive behavior treatment.
Mm-hmm.
All those things I did, and they were very effective.
Yeah.
And then I did get sober in that moment, but
Mm-hmm.
it didn't stick.
Right.
Moving forward, and that was also still several more attempts of suicide
Yeah. We've been that.
weaved in all of that, and very painful again. And I go back to, I knew there was a source. I knew that there was something bigger than myself that I was trying to get to and could not access.
Yeah.
And I knew I had had glimpses of that, and I knew that there were certain modalities that I started using. Reiki was one of the first things that I had ever done as far as like becoming a Reiki practitioner,
Yeah.
and that started helping. That was during my journey. That's the sixth or seventh year of me trying to quit drinking.
And for anybody who doesn't know, Reiki is a form of energy medicine
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that helps move energies in your body.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I started that, and that started helping me to open my heart, but I wasn't quite sure what I was doing because I was like, I was all over the place. I was
Right.
all over the place.
Right.
And finally, there was a pivotal moment where I was close to getting a year sober, 2 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
and I was still in that victim role.
Mm-hmm.
And
And how old were you at this point?
I was about 32, 30, let's see, wait,
Early 30s.
33, 34. I'm 10 years sober now. So yeah, 33, 34. And two, 2 weeks before it was going to be a year sober, I had just moved out of a boyfriend's house, and I was homeless, and my father-in-law had just passed away.
Yeah.
My son had gotten hit by a car,
Yeah.
and that was around,
traumatic.
yeah, and also during the time of this horrible reception that happened. So, buying into the story,
Yeah.
it sounds like a really good idea to go ahead and drink again.
Mm-hmm.
And I let a boy, a man, sway me into that.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing what I know now, it was just an excuse.
Right.
It was an excuse.
Mm-hmm.
So that day, I had this consciousness. I was actually starting to get a consciousness of a God of my understanding, a spiritual awakening, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I knew that this God was with me. This spiritual awakening was a part of me. And I went to drink that drink, and then I heard, "You don't want to do that." And I said, "Well, hell yeah, I do. Hell yeah. I'm tired of feeling this way. I'm in pain."
Mm-hmm.
You would too.
Mm-hmm.
And then that consciousness went away for a moment. Not that that spirit was gone forever. It's because I chose for it to be away. That was a choice that I had made.
Right.
And I saw this man who I was actually getting high with,
Mm-hmm.
and he had blue eyes. And when I saw him, he had black eyes. And in that moment, I saw him. Oh, I get goosebumps every time I talk about this.
Yeah.
Um, I realized that that was going to be me, a dead woman walking. I had
So when you
spent
were,
so many years.
yeah, because you were really high. I mean, you weren't just addicted to alcohol, you were addicted to other substances.
I was, yes,
Yes. And that time you're really high, you see this guy with his eyes aren't his eyes. They're these black, lifeless eyes. And
yes.
you see that and you're like, shit, if I keep doing this, that's gonna be me.
It gives me goosebumps every time because I mean, I like, despite of how high I was, I can remember it to this day. I
Mm-hmm.
will never forget that experience. It jolted me almost sober. Like, it jolted me to the point where it shook me to the point of, get your shit together.
And that was your rock bottom?
That was my bottom. And, it was like that moment of uh, clarity, that moment of, I'm not, it would be my luck to be 6 feet under. I would be a dead man walking on the earth. And that is something I was fearful of
Yeah. Yeah.
in a very big way.
Yeah. And you're like, maybe I do want to live. Maybe I don't just want to like half live.
Right. And that was the last time I'd ever tried to attempt suicide or anything like that. And, I didn't know it was going to work. I didn't know it was going to work.
That had life experience.
Right, right. And I had, but that I was going to be taken care of somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to get sober in order to get clarity of whether or not I had a mental illness or if it was addiction and trauma. And
And
it
what
was,
did you find out?
so what I found was that it was an illusion, really. I mean, yes, I experienced, for all those who have to take medication, I absolutely, had I not taken medication to get stabilized, I probably would not have been able to get off of the medication today. Had I not done all of the holistic treatments, gone through recovery, done talk therapy, done dialectical behavior, and all those things, coping skills, I would have not been able to get off of medication. So
So
there is space.
So you see the medication as it was a way for you to get stabilized, to be able to then come down essentially and learn the copings that were provided in traditional therapy.
Right, because I was disassociated most of my life.
Yeah. With
There was
disassociating meaning I can't connect to the emotions and the memories that happened in the past.
Exactly. I was so disassociated to my body, to myself. There was I could not connect.
Right.
It took a couple of years to really connect into my body again.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when my journey really started with my holistic practice.
So with the now that you got this groundedness in you, you can remember your childhood more, and
Oh,
oh yeah, and you can now start to feel these feelings, but not just feel them, know how to feel them in healthy ways that you can not get stuck in the pain, because that's I think why a lot of people fall into addiction is because they get stuck in pain and anguish and trauma and they don't know how to release it.
that's right.
And so the drug or the alcohol or the sex or whatever will temporarily numb,
That's right.
and then it's like you can function, but there's at a tremendous cost, and then you never learn how to get past that.
That's right.
And that's where sobriety comes in, because you can learn how to get past that. So tell me, let me ask you this, what were some of the holistic ways that you started to dabble in? You were sober at this point. You were sober for at least a few years. Which was that your longest stint of being sober?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you
I'd never been there before. I'd never been there.
Because you started using substances as a young teenager.
Yeah.
So it's like you don't know adult life.
Had been stunted for a long time. I didn't know how to live, and I didn't know how to have relationships, and I had to learn all of that. I had to learn all of that.
Much later in the game.
What's that?
Much later in the game.
Yes, much later, where people will learn that at age 19 through 25. I was dabbling in it, but I wasn't capable of meeting that person on the same wavelength, if that makes any sense.
Like, yeah, you're capable. One thing I just want people to understand real quick about drug or alcohol or substance abuse, any kind of addiction of any kind, to numb out and to dissociate and be able to disconnect from the painful experience that goes on inside of us. And I tell people this too, because a lot of people are thinking, oh, people with addiction are just lazy or this or that or the other thing. Let me tell you something, as someone who's professionally worked, in addiction, people don't just shoot up something or get blackout drunk for sheer kicks.
Yeah.
I gotta tell you, nobody is that absolutely horrendously doing that to themselves unless there is, and it's not saying it's an excuse or anything, it's just unless there is a very painful reason they want to check out.
Right.
But the part of that is when you start doing that, you start getting that habit, your brain goes on pause. And any developmental milestones and any skill development during that time, it's like hitting a video recorder on pause until you hit that play button again, that which is sobriety. Because your brain can't integrate, your nervous system can't integrate all that stuff. So I just want people to understand that, like, you're starting at like a 12, 13-year-old brain in your mid-30s.
Absolutely. And that was exactly my experience.
Yes.
And it was like a 30-something-year-old woman experiencing life for the first time. The aha moments were incredible. The aha moments were just like, oh my God, how did I not know that? Oh my God, this is beautiful. Wow.
You're like, whoa.
Yes, this is great. Like, and I'd like to speak back to the emotional part, right? Like, I could sit in my emotions finally. Mm-hmm. I could really, although uncomfortable, I could sit in my emotions for the first time ever after 2 years of sobriety.
And then be able to release them, I'm sure, in many instances and not get stuck.
Absolutely. And it was painful. And one of the biggest ones was letting go of relationships and not being in one for a very long time to get to know myself. And that was very painful.
Sure. Because I'm sure relationships were for you, relationships and being, that was also, again, everything's with intention, right? So it can become a numbing mechanism in and of itself. Right. Being in a relationship.
That's right. So I had to get rid of the drugs and alcohol to realize that I was like having issues with relationships because I was addicted to the relationship.
You're like, damn it.
So, I did that. And then finally, like, my body started catching up to me. And what I mean by that is that I was having a spiritual experience, starting to have spiritual experiences, meaning my body was showing up saying, hey, you've got more emotions to experience. You're still shoving down these emotions that you need to allow yourself to bring up. So like I was starting to have vertigo and I was starting to like have intestinal issues, and that's all about the solar plexus and self-esteem, and like my body went into a spiritual shock, basically a complete overload.
Yeah.
And I had to address that.
And so how did you address it?
Interesting you say that, because that was about the time I went to school to be a holistic nutritionist. And I started learning things about what nutrition was and holistic nutrition was, how to eat for my mind, body, and spirit. And let me tell you, that was a game changer. That was the start. The physical part of that was a game changer when I to learn how to eat for my soul and how to eat for myself.
Yeah.
It was an absolute game changer because then, sorry, I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
The phone, Siri agrees that.
Because then I was really able to connect with my spirit.
Yeah.
For the first time ever. Because I got sober.
Yeah.
And then I had to get my physical body intact so that my mind, body, and spirit could connect.
That was probably one of the first big practices in your life of you nourishing yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never nourished myself or nurtured myself.
Yes.
Ever.
That was like the first act of that. So as someone who's recovering from addiction, getting involved in holistic nutrition was a practice of, it's not just the food and the nutrients that it provides, but the act of intentionally feeding yourself what's good for you. Because for so long, you're feeding yourself, I mean, things that could kill you.
Oh, yeah. And I was okay with that.
And yeah. And now you're not okay with it.
No, not at all.
And now you're like, not only am I not okay with it, I want something better for myself.
Yeah.
That's huge.
It is huge because I thought I would never have the life that many people had out there. Like I thought I was destined to be alone, to never travel the world, to never have a joyous and happy and free from addiction or trauma or any of that. Like never, ever. Like I was destined to destitute. I was destined to be this martyr for the rest of my life.
Yes. And so you're like, no.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. And so it starts with the holistic nutrition. And this brings you, I'm taking it that it helped your body with all these physical.
It took about 2 years for my body to get intact because I had put it through a lot of trauma.
Yeah. So you do this holistic nutrition, you start to balance it out and it's like, ooh, this feels better.
Mm-hmm.
And then where does your road take you next?
Wow. So, that was the other part, because in recovery, they tell you to find a God of your understanding. And I had this God of my understanding that was from religion. And I knew I needed to connect to a God of my understanding. And I started dabbling in that. I got into Buddhism and meditation and creating an altar and the Yoruba tradition and shamanism and Chinese medicine. It became a Reiki master. Like it did everything.
Yeah.
Plant medicine. And that has been later on in my journey. But I had to find a God of my understanding, and I started creating a relationship with a spirit bigger than myself.
And what does that look like for Leanne?
So for me today and then, because I couldn't touch that and I couldn't feel it.
Yeah.
But what I learned through meditation, through connecting to my heart, because it felt like 1,000 miles away from my heart, getting outside of my mind and getting into my heart. Mm-hmm. It felt like it was 1,000,000 miles away. And once I can remember being in a meditation with a Buddhist. And it was the first time, I was about 2 years sober, and it was the first time my heart and my mind connected. And it was explosive. Mm-hmm. I get tearful. Because that in that space was when I found a God of my understanding. Mm-hmm. That I knew God loved me. And I'm going to rephrase God to the universe, to spirit, because in my shamanic practice, that's what I call God, the spirit, the great
spirit
energy, source
energy of which we all come from. That's where you kind of connected. It finally makes. That's where you found connection to it.
That's where I found connection to it. And that was the other part of my journey, is that I needed to connect to that. I'd always known I was this healer and that, I was supposed to help the world and all other stuff, right? However, how in the hell was I going to be a healer if I hadn't done my own healing work?
Mm-hmm.
How was I going to be of service to other people if I couldn't even do it for myself?
Right.
And that's where I started. That was the journey for me, was starting to do my healing work. I went to hypnosis school. I became a hypnotherapist, a shamanic practitioner. And that was all of that has been my journey for the last 10 years.
So doing a lot of shamanic earth medicine has been part of your healing journey. So would you say from your experience that the stuff you did early on, the conventional stuff, would you say it was more, tell me if this resonates with you, like more crisis management, more like, again, stabilizing, which again, like you said, very important.
Very important. Very, very important.
But where do you think it's limited in a way that holistic practices like hypnosis and shamanism and these other alternative, non-conventional ways of healing have catapulted you in the last, 5 to 10 years, and do you think you'd be where you're at without it?
So as far as conventional, it helps you to stabilize the mind.
Okay.
It has helped me to find tools to subside the crazy, the chaos in the mind.
Okay.
Whereas holistic has helped me for my mind, body, and spirit, particularly for my spirit, meaning to get outside of the mind. That's where the chaos has lived for most. Now we need our mind, right, to think and to have logic and things of that nature, because I'm not all about woo-woo stuff either.
Right.
I like to be grounded in that space of neutrality, right? To have both. I believe that we need logic, and I believe that we need the source as well.
Right. And what do you think, what have you been able to accomplish through this? I mean, whatever your heart answer is, but what do you think you've been able to accomplish through holistic practices to heal the addiction and the mental illness stuff that 10 years ago, because you went through a lot of, again, conventional stuff and it stabilized, but would you say you were healed in it? And then where do you think, and not that we're all ever healed or whatever, we're always on this journey, but what do you think through your own experience this is brought to the table, and what do you wish people who are dealing with addiction would know about holistic practices connecting you to your spirit, and why that is an integral part of healing addiction?
Because it moves the hardened energy in the body. It moves the parts that conventional cannot move.
So
rooted stuff that.
Would you say it's moved the trauma out? Would you say it was a trauma energy?
Absolutely.
The worthiness issues?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Self-loathing.
All of it.
Yeah. What I think, because not everybody knows what energy medicine is. Not everybody even understands what it means to treat things energetically. But what I, as a practitioner who I myself practice energy medicine in my practice, as someone who came from conventional medicine, I can attest to that we are energetic beings, and that our spirits cannot be addressed in conventional settings. Not that you can't bring holistic things into conventional settings to make them more holistic,
right? Which
a lot of places are these days, and that's fabulous. And I would, bravo, keep doing that. But that from your own personal experience, the whole holistic, energetic, spiritual practices have taken you like next level.
Oh yeah, to the point of like I can do things in my life that I never even could have ever imagined in a million years that I would have done.
Like what?
Meaning, like, oh, so limiting beliefs, the
Mm-hmm.
limiting beliefs that I had about whether or not I'd be successful or that I'd have peace of mind or I'd be worthy of
Mm-hmm.
love, even worthy of love or having a relationship or
Mm-hmm.
creating friendships.
Right.
um, we have these subtle bodies. We have this body, and then we have the subtle energy bodies that are in our spirits. And I had to heal that space
Mm-hmm.
and to open it up for more to come in, meaning more in a good way, a place of freedom.
Right.
um, and when we do this healing work energetically, it shifts the DNA and the molecular memory, the muscle memory in the body.
Yeah.
And that's what people, for like, it's been my experience when I work with clients. That's what I do is I shift the energy. The rest is up to them. I always call myself as the facilitator. It is
Mm-hmm.
up to the individual to do their healing work. I'm just a facilitator to create that healing. It's
So you think the holistic practices give people their power back and show them what they're capable of?
bingo,
Yeah.
bingo, because it requires the individual to choose on whether or not they're going to take the action to do the work required of them to have the freedom that they deserve.
Mm-hmm. And you had to make that choice for yourself.
I had to, I wanted to,
Right.
because if not, it it was part of it. I can't even say it correctly, but it was a lot better than having to live uh, a life that was conventional.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had to get outside the box, meaning I had to, because being in the box limited me. If you see this box right here, it
Mm-hmm.
limits you, right? But if you open it up, holy crap, look at the possibilities. And I
Yeah.
had to look at those possibilities being limitless, meaning that if I didn't open that box, then I was going to stay the same. I would not change.
Right. Or that I was destined to have recovery look a certain way. I think a lot of people get caught in that.
Bingo.
That recovery looks a certain way, that I can only be so much, that I'm limited, right? Uh, you know, for again, coming from a conventional training in addiction, there is a lot of staying stuck in this paradigm of going through this cycle of staying stable and surviving,
Bingo.
but not thriving.
How many times have I told you, I will not just survive, I will thrive.
That's right. And again, the survive part needs to happen, and the stability needs to happen. And that's why you're an advocate for things like 12 step.
Absolutely.
You're so glad you took those medications when
So
you
grateful.
did.
So grateful.
Yeah. So you're someone who's been, again, and I because we're coming to our end here, but I want to really hit this home. You're someone who has been through tremendous trauma, father murdered, sexual abuse, suicide attempts starting at young teenage years. Have had multiple suicide attempts and has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, addiction, and borderline personality disorder,
Mm-hmm.
which is that's not exactly light.
No, not
And
at
now
all.
you are, because you're, how old again are you, Leanne?
I am 44 years old.
44 years old and looking fresh. Thank you. And just saying,
Thank you.
good on you. And through 10 years of sobriety
Mm-hmm.
and doing your program, doing the work, doing the therapy, again, that holistic approach of going through the conventional things to get stabilized, but then going through these holistic alternative ways to deal with the heart of things, which are the trauma, releasing the trauma, the emotions, and the self-limiting beliefs, which is something that's not provided in conventional therapy,
Right.
typically, not all of it, typically. You are now not on any medication.
Mm-mm. No.
And you are stable and you are thriving, owning your own business.
Mm-hmm. I am.
So what do you want to tell people? What's possible?
Oh.
I mean, you're a living example here, but if you could tell people who are struggling with addiction or have a loved one struggling with addiction, what do you wish they would know? If the one takeaway from this that you wish they would know, other than all this education on holistic practices we've given today?
There's so many things, but I think ultimately it's about walking through that fear and believing that you can change despite of what you think you can do. Meaning,
Would you say the key is here?
Yeah, the key is there.
Yeah, the key is there.
The key is in the heart.
The key is in the heart. So what you're saying through your experience is that the conventional side is so needed to help heal that mind part.
That's right.
And then that piece that we're inviting into this space of healing is that heart piece and healing the heart.
That's right.
So with that, I would love for you to tell the audience what you offer with Sacred Wild Woman and how that can help people address things here.
Thank you, Erica. So Sacred Wild Woman is it's interesting. I named Sacred Wild Woman is because I went from wild child to wild woman to the sacred wild woman, right?
Oh, yeah.
But also it's to also remind everyone else of their own sacred self, their own sacred wild self, where the truth of who they are resides.
Yeah.
And what I do is I help those to, I'm a recovery coach, a holistic practitioner, a hypnotherapist, and I help with trauma. I help with recovery. I help with getting to the core of who you are.
Yeah, releasing the bags.
Releasing the bags, but also it's intense work. It's intense work.
Yeah.
It's not for any, but it's a good work.
Yeah.
And it's, I do a lot of work with addiction. I do a lot of work with limiting beliefs. I do past life regression, life between lives regression, cord removals, just things that help plant medicine work. I work with the consciousness of the plant so that you can create the relationship with yourself with these plants, because these plants want to know you. They want, like we said in the beginning of this, we're all connected, right? Well, the plants are too. And the medicine of those plants, they're healing our bodies. That's the only reason why I've been able to get off of medication, and along with a lot of the other things that I do. So I'm a big advocate for the plant medicine, the big advocate for healing the wounds, not revisiting the wounds, but healing them and going through it, right? Like really just walking through it.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Absolutely. I love that we don't have to hold on to the past. And as someone who now experienced my own different life and different traumas, and I haven't dealt with drug and alcohol addiction, but come from a family of many people that have, and have dealt with my own vices, call them what you will, addiction and things like that. You can go through it without reliving it and release them and be this free bird in the universe. So yeah, we're not here to give anybody telling you what to do. We're giving you information. You are in charge of your healing and your well-being. Always consult your trusted healing practitioner and, medical advice, but know that there is so much more to the picture, and hopefully this provided you a new perspective today. That is always my intention, is providing new perspective and giving people hope. Leanne here can be this smoking and alive at 44. I mean, and gone through the rough life, getting kicked out of rehab for fighting. There's hope.
There is hope. There is hope.
There is hope. She ain't street fighting no more.
Okay, no street fighting. No, can't do that anymore.
She's good. She's good. Well, Leanne, if people want to contact you, how can they contact you?
So you can contact me at www.sacredwildwoman.com, or you can do the Instagram is The Sacred Wild Woman, and then Facebook is Sacred Wild Woman.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for being on Firestarter today and sharing your story, what lit your fire, going through the hellhole and coming out the other side. Woo! Yes. I'm so glad you're here and just so glad you're happy and healthy. And thank you for joining.
Oh my God, I'm so honored.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Leanne. And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.